Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that a line drawn on a map has transformed your home into a frontier. Imagine that the road you used to take to the market now crosses an international border, or that your family, your farm, even your village suddenly lies on the other side of a country that didn't exist before. That's the story of Bhanu Chak, a village in the heart of Punjab. Today it sits along a heavily fenced India-Pakistan border. But for centuries, this was not a frontier. It was part of heart of Punjab, the land of 5 rivers, with a civilizational history stretching back to the Indus Valley civilization. Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs lived alongside one another. People moved between villages, markets and farms without crossing an international boundary. And then, in 1947, a line appeared. A line drawn by an English lawyer who had never been to India before. His name was Cyril Radcliffe. And 79 years later, the consequences of that line are still visible. Before partition, Bhanu Chak was part of an interconnected rural economy. The Grand Trunk Road linked the wider landscape from Kabul in Afghanistan to Chittagong. People, livestock, crops, merchants and ideas moved along this storied road. There was no international border cutting through the fields, but partition changed everything. Families were uprooted, communities were separated. Millions suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a line that they never asked for. The Radcliffe Line did not simply create India and Pakistan, it created minorities. People who had once belonged to a local majority suddenly became minorities. Villages were separated from ancestral homes, religious communities were cut off from sacred sites, and ordinary farmers found themselves living beside an international frontier. But who drew this extraordinary boundary? Cyril Radcliffe was an English lawyer. He arrived in India only weeks before partition. He knew little about Punjab or Bengal, yet he was given an almost impossible task of drawing the border between India and Pakistan, and he had barely 5 weeks. He relied heavily on maps, census figures and demographic information. But a workable boundary would have required a much more. Rivers, canals, roads, communications, agriculture, markets, and the realities of communities living on the ground. Britain, however, was leaving. And it was leaving in a hurry. Why? This brings us to Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India. Britain had originally planned to transfer power by June 1948. Mountbatten advanced the date to August 15, 1947. The borders were announced only after independence, but then millions had already begun moving. Violence exploded across Punjab, Bengal and other parts of North India. The estimates of those killed vary enormously, but hundreds of thousands and potentially up to 1 million people died. Around 14 million people were displaced. Partition became one of the largest forced migrations in modern history. But was this simply a catastrophic episode unique to India, or was it part of a broader imperial pattern? To understand that, look beyond South Asia. Look at Ireland. In 1921, Britain partitioned Ireland. Northern Ireland remained within the United Kingdom, while most of the island became the Irish Free State. Partition did not end the conflict. It helped institutionalize it. Decades of sectarian violence between Catholics and Protestants followed before the 1998 Good Friday Agreement created a new political framework. Now look further east. Look at the Middle East. During the First World War, Britain and France were negotiating the future of the collapsing Ottoman Empire. In 1916, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement divided large parts of the Arab territories into British and French spheres of influence. Once again, lines were drawn on maps, but societies did not necessarily fit inside those lines. And this is the recurring problem with imperial cartography. A map can be divided with a ruler, a society cannot. Then came the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Britain supported the establishment of a quote-unquote national home for Jewish people in Palestine, while stating that nothing should prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. What followed became one of the defining tragedies of modern world. Jewish migrations to Palestine increased substantially during the British mandate in Palestine. Arab Palestinians remained the demographic majority for much of the mandate period. Then came the 1948 war and the Nakba. Around 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Villages were emptied, families were scattered, and the question of Palestine remains unresolved. So here is the uncomfortable question. How many conflicts we describe as ancient religious hatred were actually intensified or institutionalized by modern imperial borders and political arrangements? Ireland, the Middle East, India, for Africa, these histories are not identical. Their people, circumstances, and political developments were different, but there is a recurring imperial problem. Borders were often designed around political and strategic rather than organic realities of the societies they divided. In West Asia, colonial borders contributed to states whose borders did not always correspond to the existing identities. In South Asia, partition transformed mixed societies into religiously defined nation states on the lines of the European idea of a nation state. And in Palestine, competing national projects collided with an imperial mandate with an unresolved territorial question. The consequences did not disappear when the British flag came down. They became the inheritance of the new states, and decades later they remain embedded in politics, in security, and everyday life. Now back to Bhanu Chak. In 1999, the obscure village briefly appeared on the international stage. It was chosen as the venue for the 19-gun salute ahead of Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's visit to Pakistan. Vajpayee was travelling to Lahore to inaugurate the Delhi-Lahore bus service. It was the first visit to Pakistan by an Indian leader in a decade. For divided families, it was a moment of enormous hope. Perhaps the border could become less important. Perhaps families separated in 1947 could meet again. Perhaps the Grand Trunk Road could once again become a bridge rather than a frontier. But history took another turn. India and Pakistan experienced crisis after crisis. The border hardened for many divided families. Crossing it remains extraordinarily difficult. The dream of 99 never became reality, and this is perhaps the greatest irony. Britain left South Asia claiming to have delivered independence and institutions, but for millions, independence came with displacement, trauma, and loss. The two countries that inherited this fractured geography entered a long security competition, and the dissidents of and militarized borders. So when you look at the fence separating India and Pakistan, do not see only steel and barbed wire. Think about what was there before it: a village, a road, a farm, a market, a river, a family, a shared language, a shared cuisine, a shared history. And then remember, the border wasn't always there. It was made. Like many borders created by empires, it was drawn by people sitting far away from the communities that would have to live with it. Radcliffe drew the line. Mountbatten accelerated the departure, but Britain left. But the line remained. And 79 years after partition, India and Pakistan are still living with its consequences. Perhaps that is the real legacy of imperialism. Empires can leave a territory in days, but the borders they create can outlive them for generations. And in Bhanu Chak, on the edge of Punjab, that history is still visible every day, not in a history book, but in the fence. If you like this video, please do comment and share. Thank you very much.